have with us Chloe Patterson. Chloe recently graduated from Kansas State University with a degree in baking science and management. She enjoyed while being there an officer in the Bakery Science Club, attending great baking conferences like ASB Baking Tech and IBIE. She's very experienced in gluten-free baking, commercial bread production, and legislative and policy side of the baking industry. Chloe joined Conagra in June and is part of the frozen desserts team. I remember, if you guys remember, Megan mentioned her earlier this morning as an associate food scientist. So let's welcome Chloe.
Can you all hear me okay? Yeah? Okay, awesome. Yeah, like Chef Joe said, my name's Chloe Patterson. I'm an associate food scientist with Conagra Brands, so I work on the frozen dessert Marie Callender's pies, and then our healthy choice fudge bars as well. So I'm really excited to be here with y'all today. I'm going to be talking about just some fun ways to use herbs and spices, particularly to kind of add some flavor or spice up your maybe more traditional pies. I'm going to be demonstrating a raspberry basil pie today, among other things, as part of this demo. But I think that this is just a very classic fruit pie. Marie Callender's calls it raspberry. It's raspberry blackberry. So we'll go ahead, and I'm going to be talking about 3 different ways to get some different flavors into your pies. Our first way is going to be infusing sugar. Our second way is going to be steeping liquid like cream, milk, water. We'll go into that a little bit more later. And then the third way will be jazzing up your crust a little bit by using herbs and spices as well. And at the end we'll have some samples, so you'll be able to try some of the various fillings and whipped cream that I'll be talking about. So we'll get started with our infused sugar. When I interviewed with Conagra, I had to do a bakery challenge, which at first I was a senior in college, so that sounded a little intimidating during like rolling up to finals. So I chose this raspberry pie when I was a child. Actually, my little brother was born and some nice people brought us food, and so I was introduced to a wide and varied like arrangement of foods I'd never had before, like Hot Pockets and Dole salads that come with little croutons. But the most memorable thing was this Marie Callender's raspberry pie, and I think it was probably the name raspberry. I thought that was super exciting as a little kid, but it's always stuck with me. So when I had to choose a pie to develop a recipe, modernize it, add some twists, and so that's kind of where the concept of using herbs and spices came from. But I think infusing sugar, when I was developing this formula, at first I just was like, oh, herbs, okay. Throw some basil in there, and so when you cut a slice of pie and you just get a big chunk of basil, like that's not super appealing. You might have a good flavor, but then you end up looking like you ate a bunch of spinach salad and didn't brush your teeth. So what I ended up doing was taking just I used white granulated sugar. You can use turbinado, brown sugar, whatever you want, but I think white granulated is just a very solid baseline, very neutral, sweet flavor. So I just took this. This is 200 grams or 1 cup of granulated sugar. And all we're going to do is I take 6 grams of basil, which we're going to not like actually food process right now, so it'll be a little bit noisy, but that's what I would do, is just put this in here. I would take off the bigger, woodier stems because that'll impart kind of a grassy or maybe off note that you may not want. So I use the smaller, more delicate leaves, maybe remove anything that's a little brown or wilted, and then you'll just process that briefly, maybe 5-10 seconds in your food processor, and you'll end up with something that looks like this. It's okay if there's some little bits of herbs in the pie, or in the sugar, excuse me. If it's a fruit pie, that really won't be very noticeable. If you're going to be using this sugar in something like a cooked custard, a vanilla custard, where you may not want these flecks, you can also sieve this. Mine's been sitting for a little bit, so it's a little clumpier. It wants to attract moisture, but if you do it right away, you should not have a problem there. And this also gives it just kind of a fun green color. So we'll get into kind of some inspiration and resources for choosing herbs and spices and maybe making some more flavor combinations that are just interesting and maybe different than your more classic, like cinnamon, peach, or whatever. So all we're going to do to make this filling is we're going to take our fruit. I like to let the sugar sit for maybe 20-30 minutes to really let the volatile oils and the moisture from the leaves just distribute among the sugar, really get those brought out, so you'll get some nice flavors. So I just take my blackberries here. They've been washed, patted dry. Raspberries as well. These are 2 pints of each. I recommend for a 9-inch pie starting there. I wouldn't go much lower because you'll get a very slumped in pie. You can do more if you want to have a more full top. And you can use frozen fruit as well. If you do, I would recommend increasing your starch a bit because you'll end up with a very runny filling from the excess moisture in the fruit. So we'll also go ahead and add some applesauce. This is a 1/3 cup of just unsweetened applesauce. When I was developing this formula, I like to take a look at the nutrition facts panel and the ingredient statement on the box that I brought home from the grocery store, because obviously at that point I had no idea how these pies were made. And so I saw that there were apples on the ingredient statement, and I didn't really know, like, there were no apple slices or chunks, at least that I could tell, in the pie. So I decided to go ahead, and as many of you may have heard earlier during Meg and Chef Joe's talk, apples contain pectin, which is a thickener. It's a form of dietary fiber. So the applesauce really allows us to have a filling that's nice and thick, gives us a little bit of sweetness that's not overwhelming. And so I wanted to really move this filling from something that's maybe a little heavier, jammier, very sweet, to a fresh summer pie, because I think of berries as being a very fresh summer fruit, which fortunately we're about to roll around at that time, go to the berry patch, pick some berries. So that's kind of where the applesauce came from. Let me bring my granulated sugar down a little bit and really focus on the flavors of the herbs and of the fruit. So all we're going to do, we're going to take our herbs, our sugar. Oh, and if I didn't mention before, 6 grams of fresh basil is about a tablespoon. You can totally do this with dried herbs as well. Your flavor profile will be different, so that's something you'll have to take in mind and probably test as you develop your ideal flavor profile, but I would recommend backing off on that number if you do use a dried herb or spice. And this is helpful for a dried ground spice like cinnamon or cardamom, something that you won't be infusing the sugar as much because it's already dried and ground. And so some of the oils and such have been lost, but it'll help disperse your spices more evenly, and you won't get like a huge pocket of cinnamon. So all we're gonna do is just toss this together. Very simple, easy filling, but it tastes really fresh and delicious. Just wanna make sure everything's nicely coated, pretty lumpy at this point, but in the oven, the juices from the berries will be released, and you'll have a really nice, thick, fresh tasting pie filling. That's all you do. It's like 5 ingredients. Don't want to leave out the cornstarch like I just did. I normally will whisk this into my sugar first to help prevent lumping. Since this is cold, it shouldn't be a problem. Don't do that, otherwise you will get moisture migration all over the place and your filling will be very runny. So we'll just fold that in, trying not to crush my fruit too much. That's okay. I'm going to be using a whole wheat actually pie crust today. It's all butter, so it has a really nice nutty flavor that offsets the fresh sweetness of this filling. Super delicious. Not going to be demonstrating making this today, but the recipe is on your handout if you're interested. So yeah, so we'll just plop this filling in here. Just get all the nice sugar out. Okay. Put that to the side. Got my gloves. Okay. So yeah, I'm excited for the warmer weather in Omaha. It's been pretty chilly. We've just started to get into spring, so I'm excited to hopefully try to grow some fresh herbs myself so I can use them in my cooking. So we'll just, yeah, all the way from Omaha. Yep. Yeah, it's been nice to have a break from the cold and wind, so. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and if you'll have questions too while I'm showing you or talking, like, please feel free to jump in and let me know. Okay, so I prepared this ahead of time. Let it temper so it doesn't get too cracking. Yeah, a little bit faster. I figured you may not want to sit around and watch me make pie crust for a long time, so I'm just going to fold this under to crimp today. Normally I'd probably trim this a little bit more, but I think it'll be good for now. So all you're going to do is put your top crust on. You can do this with a streusel topping as well. Really nice with some oats in there. You could put some fun herbs and spices in your topping as well. So we'll just crimp this, pinch this over. Can do a nice fun crimp on it.
What kind of a dough is that?
This is a white whole wheat pastry crust. It's almost equal parts flour and butter, so it's very pliable. You know, very probably high in fat and cholesterol as well, but that just means it's delicious. Yeah, so it is composed of a white whole wheat flour, so you get some of the benefits of a whole grain without being very bitter because you don't have the tannins that are in like a red whole wheat. And then there's also some AP. You can use pastry flour as well to give a little bit more strength to the gluten matrix because the bran will want to cut through that and it'll tear easily. So I found when I was working on this formula as well, if I used all whole wheat, it kind of wanted to crumble and fall apart. So a little bit of pastry flour helped a lot. So then I would just slash the top of this and pop it in my oven at 375 degrees for like 45, 55 minutes. I like to take the temp as well, so you want to hit 165 or above to make sure there's not any salmonella or any other nasty bugs in there, which there should not be, and then also make sure your starch is appropriately gelatinized, and then we'll let it cool for about 2 hours so you get a really nice slice. So that's what it'll look like when it's done. Very rustic, but delicious, super unique flavor. I think it's kind of fun to just show up with a pie where you're like, oh, it's just a fruit pie, super normal, and then you're like, surprise, no, it's, yeah, I did a lot of impromptu taste testing on my roommates when I was working on this, and I think that appeased them. They were a little frustrated. They could never use the kitchen, always full of pie. So that's our first way, infusing herbs and spices into sugar. Yeah, super simple, not very time consuming. You can make this ahead of time, but I wouldn't recommend doing it more than a day or so, because otherwise you'll get a very clumpy sugar. I mean, it won't make a whole lot of difference to your flavor. Second way to do, kind of affect our flavor profile is to steep liquid. So I really recommend doing this with cream, half and half, whole milk, something with a little bit higher level of fat because fat carries flavors very well. You can totally use water as well and almost make like a tea. If you're doing a pie that's containing gelatin or something where you would add water, wouldn't recommend just going ahead and like adding additional liquid to your pie because it will become very soupy. But up to you. I think this is just a really fun way to get creative, kind of think outside the box. So all we will do, there's two ways to do this. I'm going to show you the cold method, which takes about 24 hours. So all you do is you just pour your liquid. This is a pint container, so I'm going to do a little under a pint. You're going to place whatever herb or spice you choose. I'm using a dried bay leaf today. I really love bay leaf infused whipped cream. I have some that you'll be able to try in a few minutes. But it's just something, I went to a restaurant in Chicago a couple weeks ago actually called Fat Rice. It's a really fun restaurant. It's Asian Portuguese fusion cuisine. And they had I think it was a chocolate torte with a bay leaf whipped cream. And so that's where my inspiration came from. But I'd never thought of using bay leaf before. To me that reads like stew or Italian food, or you have your spice bouquet for a chicken stock or something very savory. But if you take a whiff of bay leaf, and I can pass this around in a minute, it's very floral, very sweet, and I think it plays really well with the kind of round, yummy notes of heavy cream. So I just put 3 or 4 bay leaves in here. Again, the quantity is totally up to you. I recommend testing this out ahead of time so you can really hone in on what you're looking for. And all you'll do, just put your spice in. If you're using something that's a little bit smaller, you can make a cheesecloth or muslin bag so you don't have spices going all over the place. You can also strain this afterwards. All you do, close this up, pop it in your fridge 24 hours, and in the morning or whenever you're done, ready to use it, give it a taste, see if it's where you'd like it to be, and it's really, really very simple. There's another method that's a little bit faster that I won't be demonstrating today, but I can tell you a little bit about it. It's the hot method. So you're basically making tea, more or less, with your liquid. So for a liquid like heavy cream, you'll just want to bring this to a gentle simmer on your stovetop. You want a few small little bubbles around the edge, some steam coming up, but you don't want to bring it to a boil. You don't really want to skin on top of your dairy. After you bring that up to your simmer, turn off the heat, pop in your herbs, your spices, and then you'll just let that sit for about 30 minutes. And then you can strain those out and let that cool. I recommend cooling for 3 to 4 hours if you're going to whip it, because otherwise if it's warm, it won't whip as well. But if you're going to make a cooked custard filling where you're going to be bringing that back up to heat, you can go ahead and just use it right away. Yeah. Oh, when it's hot or in, I don't cover it. You can if you'd like. It's really up to you. But yeah, I like to let some of the steam come off and the moisture, it reduces a little bit, but if you want to retain that moisture, totally up to you. Yeah, so again, super simple, fun way to get some different flavors in. And then our third way, which some of you are probably familiar with, very often seen in like a savory pie, like a chicken pot pie with basil in the crust, or a short crust with rosemary. But with this application, I would really encourage you to just take a walk down the spice aisle, think about kind of like my realization with bay leaf. And actually, I'll go ahead and pass this around if you want to take a whiff. Yeah. Oh, really? Oh, I've just found it in the spice aisle. That's funny. Maybe it's regional. Omaha? Interesting. Have you tried maybe do you have Penzeys spices? Where are you from, I guess? Around here? Or? Okay. I don't know. Interesting. Yeah, there should be Culinary Bay. Yeah, okay. I did have trouble finding it at Walmart, but I went to a smaller, like a Hy-Vee. They had it. So maybe, yeah, I don't know. I think you can also purchase it online. Amazon for sure will have it, or maybe King Arthur Flour, another bakery supplier. But yeah, I think it's really beneficial to just take a walk down the spice aisle or at the farmer's market and just kind of take the time and like think outside the box and what would be interesting. For example, with bay, or you'll taste in a little bit, I have a white flaky pastry crust with black pepper that goes really well with a sweet malted butterscotch filling. So just kind of think about your pies as a whole versus individually, and so that's a really fun way to kind of get a different flavor profile out of it. And again, with your crusts, you can incorporate herbs and spices directly when you cut in your butter, or you can use the steeped liquid that we made before if you're doing pâte à sucré, where you have a cream fraction, or if you're using just ice water, you can chill down your steeped ice water as well. So that's another way, especially if you don't want like a particulate or a piece of an herb in your crust as well. So we'll go ahead and taste in a minute, and we'll have some time for questions. Yeah.
You know how you get like bugs in your flour?
Yeah.
Bay leaf, you put bay leaf in your flour and your pie spices, that'll keep bugs out.
Really? I didn't know that. They don't like the oils in the bay leaf, or do you know why?
I'm not really sure, but just someone at the
Huh.
health food store that told me about it. And then I bought it, and it works because I got all of a sudden those baking.
Yeah.
I don't know why, I get these little tiny black bugs, and they were like showing up in my kitchen, they even got on my curtains.
Oh my goodness.
Because
Yeah.
my husband just got out of hand, and I freaked out about bugs, and they told me what kind of bugs they were, and they told me to get bay leaves and just put it in my spices, because it might have been in one of my spices, and it got out of hand. And then I just started setting it behind things like in your cabinet. You put it bay leaf in your cabinet, and it'll keep those like bugs that you get in flour and stuff out of it.
Interesting.
It works.
Yeah, like grain weevil or
Yeah,
something.
that's what it is.
Yeah. I've heard that peppermint oil will do something similar, but I didn't know that about bay leaf. Yeah. That's fascinating. Yeah, for sure. That's really cool. Thanks for sharing. But yeah, so to kind of wrap up, I'm gonna take these gloves off. I don't need them anymore. Just pop these over here. I think the final thing I really want to encourage you all, this is kind of like Mrs. Frizzle for Magic School, whoa, I'm confusing my childhood stories here. Magic School Bus, not Magic Tree House, two different things. Both great series, highly recommend. She says, take chances, make mistakes, get messy, right? So don't be afraid to try a flavor combination that sounds a little weird. I really recommend, like when I was working on this raspberry basil pie, I think I tried thyme at first, and that, to me, didn't go so well. But I used a muffin tin, and I did like a little matrix of the different spices and herbs I wanted to try. So that way you have a nice little sample without having to go and invest like 2 quarts of fruit into something that you may or may not be happy with in the end. So that's another good way to prep, especially for something like this, that we can really hone in on the flavor profile that you want before you go and start making full pies and taking up hours and hours of your time. But I wanted to kind of point out these 3 books. There are plenty more, but I think that these are really inspirational for different and unique flavor profiles in pies. and other foods as well. The first one is the Flavor Bible. I'm sure some of you probably have seen this before, but it just gives resources for flavor pairings. They call it the Essential Guide to Culinary Creativity, so highly recommend. It shows, like, for example, like chestnuts, and it'll go down and describe the flavor and the techniques that you can use to process it and what other things it pairs well with. So this is a great way to just get some inspiration. Like this suggests pairing orange with pistachios, and that's maybe not something I would have thought of on my own. So highly recommend, not super expensive either, so great addition to your library. The Art of the Pie, very good resource for just pie making in general, but she uses a lot of interesting spices. She also uses a lot of liqueurs in her pies, orange liqueur. She uses an apple whiskey, I think, in one of them, but she also has a chai spice pie with saffron, which I think sounds absolutely delicious. So cookbooks like these are a great way to get some ideas or think about, like, what could I do that would be similar, but also my own unique twist on a pie like this. And then last but not least, oh, sorry, did you have a question? Okay. The 4 and 20 Blackbirds Pie Book. This is a pie shop in Brooklyn, New York. I've never been personally, but I'd love to go. Almost every pie recipe in this book has a unique twist or something different. There's a lavender honey pie, or the one that I think is super interesting to me, I haven't made it, I need to, is the paprika peach pie. And that's another, yeah, right, it's paprika peach. So I think that's another way to kind of think almost horizontally, like, okay, typically it's maybe a cinnamon peach or allspice, or you can use like an apple pie seasoning in a peach pie. So those are all warm spices. So paprika's kind of also a warm spice too, but you might not think to use it in a dessert application so much. So I think that sounds like a super delicious resource as well. You can also look up online on publications like Baking and Snack or Bake, or SIFT is King Arthur Flour's publication, and oftentimes, usually around the beginning of the year, but many will publish throughout, as like Consumer Trends of 2019, and that'll give you a kind of interesting look into like what people are really into, what flavors are popular. And then last but not least is ingredient suppliers' websites. For example, like again with the raspberry basil, I did a lot of research on Driscoll's website because they sell raspberries and blackberries, right? And they have some really nice charts and matrices that'll help you pair fruits with they were mostly focusing on fresh herbs. So maybe if I'd looked at that before I tried my time in raspberry, I would have been a little bit better off. But nonetheless, yeah, and then other things like spice suppliers like Tones and McCormick's. So yeah, just really think outside the box. What would you like to try? What's something that's a little different or intriguing? I think that's a really fun thing about playing with herbs and spices, is you have a sense of intrigue. You're like, oh, what is this? I can't quite tell. And then you get to talk about like how I made my pie and what I did. And so I think that's super fun. So yeah, do you guys have any questions or ideas? And we'll have some samples that y'all can try as well. Yeah, for sure.
When you said, like, put something in a tin, crack
Mhm.
it, what nuts and everything, do you mean, did you use, like, canned pie stuff, or should I actually get the real one?
You can. That'll give you at least a general sense of what your flavor profile is, especially if you're like more limited on time. I think that there will be a flavor difference just due to the retort processing that a canned pie filling goes through. But yeah, for sure, that's a way you could definitely test.
And also, incorporating the herb or spice,
Mhm.
like in flour, you said cut it in.
Mhm.
Mix it in with the flour first and then cut it, like you would normally, or?
Yeah, I think you would probably want to process it, yeah, make it smaller in some way ahead of time, especially if it's a fresh herb. I would mince it or julienne first. Dry, yeah, you could probably blend it in, especially I like to use a food processor to make my crust, so then you could totally just add it with the butter, but if you're doing it by hand, you'd probably be better off like mixing it into the flour first. Yeah. Mhm. You could probably just put it straight in, yeah, because then you'll get a larger, like, it'll be beautiful with the visual of like the culinary lavender buds or your rosemary leaves. Yeah, I would probably leave this. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, for sure. What's that? Oh yeah, so today you'll be tasting the raspberry basil pie filling, and then the whole wheat. There's a little pastry coin there for you to taste with that as well. And then we have a malted butterscotch pie filling with our bay leaf infused whipped cream, and then a black pepper pastry crust. And we do have some samples of just the bay leaf infused whipped cream if anybody has.
Yellow and what's the?
The yellow is it's a malted butterscotch filling and has the bay leaf. Yeah, thought that'd be kind of fun. It pairs really well with the bay leaf. Thank you. And then the raspberry basil filling as well. So just a little sample.
How do you name that pie? What's the
The raspberry? Raspberry. It's like raspberry blackberry, but it's raspberry. So I think that was a creation of Marie Callender. Was a real lady. She had some pie restaurants back on the California coast in the 40s, 50s, and so she was a prolific pie baker. And so I think someone came up with the name raspberry, and so when we did the pies for like grocery sale for frozen, that's name stuck, and I think it's a fun one. A little faster to say than raspberry blackberry. Oh yeah, I like to say that this is the pie that got me my job. So
Now, why did you wash your raspberries?
I just like to take a quick rinse, like pat them down. Just because sometimes there's foreign material or thorns or little leaves that stick to them. You don't want to do it in advance because they'll get really soggy. But if you do it right before and pat them down really well, they'll be fine. But yeah, I picked out some little like raspberry leaves, and those don't always feel so good when you bite into them. So, yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, for sure.
What is malted butterscotch?
So this is just a butterscotch filling, and I use some malted milk powder. Yeah, so kind of like a malt or a shake, right? That's one of my favorite flavors. I used to work at an ice cream shop, and that's what I'd make all the time. So. No, you can, that's actually, I don't know if you've heard of Stella Parks of Brave Tart. She has a very fun cookbook, very scientific. She goes into a lot of detail about why recipes work. So this is her formula for the malted butterscotch. So you can find it online for free on Serious Eats. She likes to also recreate classic American desserts that you'd find in the grocery store. So she has recipes for things like pecan sandies and Oreos. And so this is kind of her take on like the boxed Jell-O butterscotch, with a little bit of a twist from the malt. So I thought that was just a fun way to add another flavor. Yeah. Yeah, the malt powder. Oh, the bay leaf. Yeah, I'm sure you could infuse. You could totally infuse herb or spice into the liquid that you're using. Yes, absolutely. I would if it was the mix and you had some liquid or whatever, but it might be harder if it was a pre-made. You could sure try.
I'm always looking for the lazy way out. And make it.
So the efficient way, right? Yeah.
Dried herbs again.
Mhm.
Could you add it straight to your filling, or should you, like, pulverize them?
I think it depends on the maybe more of the mouthfeel that you're looking for. If you pulverize them or grind them, then you'll probably get a little bit more of an even dispersion throughout, and they'll allow them to blend in more invisibly with your filling per se. Yeah, you'll see it. But if you're okay with seeing pieces of herbs, or if that's what you're going for, it's kind of a way to experiment and find kind of the pie that you really want to make. So yeah. Anything else? Oh, thank you. All right, thank you all.